Welcome to Resiliency Within. I am your host, Elaine Miller-Karas, and I'm so happy to have Dr. Michael Sapp, the CEO of the Trauma Resource Institute, on my show again. We did part one of this two-part series, and we're going to be talking about the challenges that the international community has been faced since many of the administrative changes that are coming from the Trump administration. But we're also going to focus on some of the amazing generosities we've heard from our global community, and also to remind us what else may be true and how we, during a time of suffering, may also be able to shift our attention to the things we actually can do when maybe we hear from our family, our friends, our colleagues, not only abroad, but within the United States, that they've lost their job, that they're not certain what's going to happen to a passionate project that they've been working on. For example, ending malaria in certain countries that now, with the funding from the US pulled away, that many programs are in limbo and some have already closed. So, but what happens with Mike and I, because we both work within the Trauma Resource Institute, oh my goodness, do we hear stories that are so deeply human about people surviving such hardship. There is still kindness and hope on the planet, and yet there's much to do to mitigate some of the suffering that's happening right now. So, Mike, I'd like to welcome you and see what's on your mind right now as we get started.
Well, I think that's it. I think that last point that you just made has been on my mind a lot is the what we will often say in our organization with the models that we teach. What else is also true that I have I think we all have a negativity bias. I mean, our nervous system's designed that way. And so I find it very easy. It's kind of like a car that's out of alignment. When I let go of the wheel, it just naturally drifts toward the negative, the distress, all of the stuff that's going wrong. And and that doesn't mean I don't want to engage that. I don't want to address it. It's just that when I do that and when I'm focused on that entirely, I get overwhelmed. I just get overwhelmed. I get where I feel almost like I can't, almost paralyzed in some ways. And so to be able to recognize and attend to and with intention focus on, like you said, those acts of generosity that we also see. One does not negate the other. It just means that when I can focus on this, when I can focus on the the acts of generosity, the things that may even bring a smile to my face, I can rest in that enough so that I can stay engaged with the other challenges that are also there. And so I guess for me, it's the how do we do this? How do we work in such a way with so much suffering, with so much distress, and and with the news cycle that seems to pump out a lot of the negative and the distress because that is what's happening, of course. How can I at least stay engaged? And so I'm finding myself having to be more intentional in redirecting my attention, at least for some time, on things that aren't so challenging.
Yeah, and I think that's, we've been talking a lot about this since we're both in the Southern California, is how do we have those nourishing moments when there's so much
Mhm.
suffering in the world? And so I want to talk a little bit about, what is the US Agency for International Development, and more or less kind of what does it do? And I want to say, I'm going to actually read something from the Lancet. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Lancet, it's a weekly peer-reviewed general medical journal, and it's one of the oldest of its kind. It is also one of the world's highest impact academic journals, and it was founded in England in 1823. So I think that, when I read things from the Lancet, I pay attention to them because of just what a credible um, uh, journal they have been and how they promote health and well-being for really humankind. So they say that the US Agency for International Development has managed more than 40 billion a year in foreign assistance and has programs in more than 120 countries. The money goes towards everything from helping refugees from places like Ukraine to promoting educational systems and good governance in various parts of the world. a huge amount of U.S. foreign assistance goes toward promoting global health, covering everything from mosquito nets to prevent malaria, to vaccinations against measles and polio, to trying to stop the rise of AIDS in African countries. So people who lose their funding are going to become more susceptible to starvation, to disease, and possibly to extremist ideology. I mean, I think they say this is the type of thing where if you lose educational services, for example, you have young people without a school to attend, then they're going to turn to activities that could fuel crime. Now, why does that matter? If they live in another country and we live in the United States, and I'm going to say we have become a global community. There's so many people that travel to and from our country from different parts of the world. So if there is an outbreak of a certain infectious disease, and let's say Sierra Leone, if we aren't part of that international community to help to stop that spread of that infectious disease, then it could also come here to the United States and impact us all. And because the United States has been leaders in healthcare, that changing our role in these kinds of activities could have not only could be cause death not only in other countries but also in our own. And so I think that's something that a lot of us don't necessarily know what the U.S. Agency for International Development is, and people will say, well, why does it matter to me? So just so you know as well, is that Mike and I have traveled to many disasters, and I often have seen USAID markings on different kinds of things, tents, other things that are there at the scene of disasters. And so that becomes really important as part of an international community. And I'm afraid, I don't know how much we've responded to the recent tragedy in Myanmar and Thailand with the terrible earthquake there that they're expecting that thousands of people have died. But I also want to share one other aspect of this. Farmers in the United States, they grow grain to send abroad when there is a health crisis or a food crisis, food insecurity in another country. So that means that if farmers aren't going to be paid, that means that they lose part of their income in the US. So it's important to know that much of the spending of USAID actually happens for Americans who are providing assistance and help to other people in other parts of the world. So the U.S. aid, for example, has been a key supporter of the World Bank Group, the World Food Program, the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, driving progress towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And without USAID, the future of many global health programs hangs in the balance, putting countries, countless people at risk of, it's not a benign thing in terms of losing their life. Obviously, we have to think of a world community. If the United States pulls out, how are other countries coming in? It's not that other countries haven't helped in the past, but it's also not just countries, but how can I help? How can you help, Mike? How can the nonprofit that we're involved with help during this time? Because we know that it's painfully clear, and that's what they say, the sweeping, chaotic, and ill-considered unilateral halt of global health programs is not a way to institute change in the opinion of the Lancet. So, change should be strategic, transparent, carefully implemented, and done in a spirit of support rather than imposition. And the way that we have sadly conducted ourselves from the US experience, it has really left a huge hole in response with no time for preparation for how a person or a country or an organization could change their approach. So literally, not only are there thousands of jobs being lost in the United States from people who used to work for USAID, but also thousands of people losing jobs internationally because of the way that we have decided to go about doing this. So as I say this, which is very sad and tragic in my estimation, because if anything is going to change within an organization, we want time to plan. If a leadership changes, we want time to plan and see if that's going to be a void. How do we fill that void? Well, literally, leadership in many aspects of USAID lost their job in a nanosecond, right? Unceremoniously. So even if people are trying to still recreate some of those projects, the people that were implementing them also are not there in the same numbers who may have known how to make those things happen. So as I'm talking to you about, I wanted to give you an overview of this, and also USAID was actually formed as a legislative act by the John F. Kennedy administration. That was a lot of years ago. And the United States has made a huge impact. And part of this is also creating stability within the world environment and also creating allies for the United States that can be quite important, of course, when there is instability in the world. So I just kind of wanted to give this larger vista, some of which came from the Lancet and some of which I'm sharing with you from some of my experience of working internationally. So, Mike, saying that, we also have spoken to some people within our community, and I'm wondering if you'd like to share what you and I did this morning at 6 a.m. Pacific time as part of our response to what's happening in the world.
Well, sure. And this is one of many responses I know we've had, right? But this one in particular, we provided a free one first part of a free workshop. We're going to be doing another follow-up meeting, probably two follow-up meetings for a group in the DRC. And and that was originally someone had reached out to us, one of our contacts that worked in the DRC, to reached out to us, uh, indicating that they wanted to have to learn more about our model, about how to utilize our skills to help people with the horrendous um, violence that they're experiencing in their country right now. And as in that conversation, indicated to us that they themselves are the person that had contacted us had actually been funded by USAID and lost that funding and wanted to make sure that we got something started uh, before too long. And so that was just a little not so little impact that we've seen, a more personal impact that we've seen. But it didn't, at that point, it didn't prevent us from being able to say, yeah, let's do this. Let's figure out how we can make this happen. Because we know that our skills and what we teach have helped many people in many parts of the world, many parts of the US, uh, uh, learn how to manage their nervous system response to stress and trauma in a way that then enables them to, I think, really not only survive, but also find ways of trying to help others in situations that are just awful.
Well, and I think that the areas that we've been working in at the Trauma Resource Institute, close to 20 years now, is that we have tried to mitigate the impact of trauma and mental health conditions. And when there's a huge blow to funding, and much of the programs that are funded, not only in in our world community, also in the United States, for example, with Medicaid, um, much of the mental health funding comes from governmental sources. And so that means that there's going to be a void in those programs, which are so essential for the mental health of communities. So I am happy to say for us that um, we can offer our very simple skills, which are skills of well-being that lead to really, well, not only mental health, but physical health in terms of feeling better in one's body, like you said, nervous system regulation, so people can negotiate what happens to them in the world.
Well, and even going a step further, I would say, and I know you and I talk about this all the time, is that when we are, again, using the terminology within our models, when we're in that zone of well-being, when we are feeling more regulated, we're able then to go out and act in ways that can hopefully affect change. At the very least, what I have found in our many efforts in working with people in this way, I have often seen a generosity, a desire for people when they're in their zone, when they are able to have a more balanced, regulated nervous system. I see a strong desire to go out and help. And I think that's it's so not only individual health, but there's a public health, there's a community health that expands um, and grows in what I've seen, even in the midst of some really dire circumstances. And I should probably clarify, I'm sorry, I used the term DRC just for anybody else that may not know that we're talking about the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Yeah. And so I am really proud of the Trauma Resource Institute that even though if there was no funding, we have a humanitarian arm. And I'm just going to remind our listeners that we are a nonprofit and that donations can come to us that helps us to be able to continue to provide programming when the USAID has been taken away. So I think that we are committed to that and and really feel how important that is to continue that humanitarian work, even though the funding is no longer available. So I'm proud of that.
I am too. And if I can add just a very simple example of, this, how it can be, um, how it can grow from an individual using skills, developing their ability to regulate their nervous system, and how that can expand even in a very small way, and how it can lead to really wonderful things. Just to let you know, we did well, Elaine led a CRIM teacher training back in 2010 to folks in Haiti in the wake of the earthquake back then, and taught a cohort of people in these skills that then would go out and teach the skills to others. And then had subsequent trainings to help support them over in subsequent years. And then we recently, relatively recently, within the last couple of years, have been reconnecting. And I mean, we've stayed connected throughout all those years, but especially so recently, given the increased violence and the increased incidences of gangs going into neighborhoods. And so we have been meeting with 3 of our Haiti CRIM teachers on a regular basis, once a month. And I wanted to just share a very, very, well, I'm trying to
Yeah,
make
we
it brief.
originally trained them in 2010, and we have
Yes.
a very strong relationship with them now for over, 15 years.
Yes. And have been using the skills for that long. And they have. And so in our last meeting, which was this last week, I was speaking with them, and they all 3 have been displaced. They all 3 are not in the neighborhoods where they live. The violence has gotten so bad they've had to flee. And in this particular example, one of them, Madame Armonte, had shared with us that there was an incident where gang violence had come into where she was, that the community that she was, the neighborhood, and so she had to run and flee, and got to a place that was safer. And when she got there, and this is how she told it, when she got there, a gentleman offered her a chair to sit because she had been running. And so when she sat, she was able to ground, and she did one of our skills, which is skill number 3, grounding. And as she did the skill, she noticed that she started to tear up, and tears would flow. And so we talk about tears and how tears can be really effective in helping us reset our nervous system and rebalance. I mean, it gives us all sorts of wonderful hormones and chemicals that help soothe the body, and help our natural painkillers kick in. And as she grounded, as she allowed the tears to flow, she noticed someone else down the way that needed help. And so she got up immediately and went to help. Now I hear that thinking, this woman just was fleeing for her life and could have easily at that point said, every man for themselves, right? And said, I'm going to just worry about my own safety. And while she may have been in those moments, right, we have those survival responses of a flight response, and she had that. When she had a moment where it was safer, when she had the time in that moment, and it only took a few, maybe a minute, if that, to sit and ground, she was able to notice someone else that needed help, and then act on it. I found that so heartwarming and so unbelievable that even in the midst of that kind of distress, that could happen. Now, of course, I hear stories like that in many places that we go. But that to me was just a small example of having that skill that she intentionally used in that moment to regulate her nervous system enough that then led to generosity, that then led to helping behaviors. And I think, let's expand that. What happens if we start to learn these skills? What happens when we can use these skills and practice these skills? Will that expand that tendency to help versus the tendency to harm? That's what I'm idealistic, I know, but that's what we see from time to time.
Well, I'd like to say too that we had a small amount of funding that they needed to have in order to
Mm,
become a registered, like a non-government agency. So because they have skills, and we've been talking to them all along about how, people probably within Haiti, if there's organizations, will pay for you to come to do these workshops, which they're very well skilled to do. And they've sent us all sorts of lovely pictures of them at schools, at libraries, doing this kind of work. So in any event, we were able to do that. So now they're registered, and they sent us a certificate, which of course they're very proud of. And now they can go forward to do more work within their own country. Now, this is how one small nonprofit is helping one group in Haiti, who don't have funding now, to be able to do some things that would be helpful. Now, also do not want to give the idea that we think this by far is enough.
mhm.
I think we can do small things that may help some people right now, as there is great suffering in such a magnitude. And certainly what we're doing right now, yes, it could save someone's life, but when there's a lack of those basic needs that, the hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and certainly food and housing, two of the most important, are being impacted from, the actions of the current administration. Now that becomes a life and death situation. And even though we can help people with these kinds of wellness skills, if you're hungry, if you're starving, they're not going to be as
Right.
effective. I don't want to give people an idea that, as optimistic and as hopeful as we are, there is a grim reality when we decide to completely cut off certain funding that is life essential. Now, I'm hoping
Mm,
that the government is going to reconsider some of their programming, because they did say they would provide essential service for people that are starving. And I'm hoping that that will continue, that they will hold true to that. But I still think, even with all of that, and I think I mentioned it last week when we were talking, that, that's kind of this chaos soup that many
mhm.
people are living in right now. Because I think the other aspect of what we're talking about is the unexpected nature of something that happened, I'll say, Mike, too much too fast,
100%.
without the ability to prepare. So would you say, Mike, that with the skills that to help them prepare, that if they have wellness skills, how does that help them maneuver the chaos around them?
Well, no, and I appreciate you saying that because, like you said, we know that there's danger. There is, like you said, if you have no access to food, the skills are not going to magically prepare food. They can help mitigate some of the distress we might feel, but my goodness, let's get the survival piece taken care of. Let's get food. Let's get, safety, all of those things, because those are the things that, um, well, to your point earlier, are in danger of being lost with funding like this, cuts in funding like this. Um, and yes, some of these skills can really help. These skills can really help mitigate uh, the mental health, the impact of that is clearly there. Um, so yeah, I mean, my knee-jerk response, it's a very short, brief response, which I know I could expand on, is
Yes.
yeah.
Well, I guess I want to also say is that, some people may be tuning in for the first time. I'm talking to Michael Sapp from the Trauma Resource Institute. You can reach the Trauma Resource Institute at traumaresourceinstitute.com to learn more about the programs. And also, if you think you'd like to donate to us, because right now is a time for humanitarian donations for nonprofits like ours to be able to continue our work and our humanitarian arm, because of the funding that's being taken away. But the other thing I want to mention is, the wellness skills that we're talking about are called the Community Resiliency Model. We call it CRIM for short, or CRM. And you can learn these skills by a free iChill app that we have, iChill. So you can, if you have a smartphone, just put iChill into the search engine and it will come up. Right now, we're in 5 languages, but we're going to be in more, aren't we, Mike? We have English, Spanish, Ukrainian, Hebrew, and Arabic, and we soon will have Japanese and Portuguese, and I'm hoping French as well, so that we are expanding our language capacity. But this little iChill app actually helps us, right, to learn the skills of the model, and that you can use it anywhere that you can. It's right on really literally in the palms of your hand if you have a smartphone. But let's say you don't have a smartphone, but you have access to a computer. You can go to ichillapp.com, and there online you can um, go to that website, and we have all those languages, and you can listen to the skills in order to be able to learn how to cultivate the well-being within you that really we have seen helps people be more available. Their prefrontal cortex, right? The thinking part of their brain is
Hmm.
online. They can create solutions for the problems they're facing. And right now we're facing a lot of problems. So, when you get a group together of people within your community that are all speaking maybe a similar language, and they can be in what we call that zone of well-being, there may be the planning that can come about that can actually help not only the individuals survive, but the communities survive. Yes. So we're going to take a short break, Mike, and so we can hear from our sponsor, the Trauma Resource Institute, again. And
Perfect.
yes, perfect. And we will be back in just a moment to talk more with Mike Sapp about the Trauma Resources really response to humanitarian crisis during these very difficult times. Welcome back. We've had taken a short break, and I'm here with Dr. Michael Sapp from the Trauma Resource Institute. I want to remind people again that you can reach the Trauma Resource Institute at traumaresourceinstitute.com. You can learn about our programs, and really, very importantly, right now, I'm going to do a pitch for donations, Mike, because we've been responding to a number of humanitarian crises, and we've had volunteers come out and some of the leadership of our organization. And I'm going to just mention that we're Angelinos. We live in Southern California, so we've also been responding and trying to help people who've been suffering from the fires here. But we're talking about the international community today,
Mhm.
and I'm just also, we had a. Can you tell them a little bit about our resiliency pauses,
Mm.
and how we've been doing this? And I also want to talk a little bit about Gloria Simoneau, who came, and she is now in Kenya. But let's talk about that. So tell them about our resiliency pauses.
Sure. These are offerings that we have provided in the past that we're providing now every other week. But in the past, we've provided them periodically as needed when there have been maybe something extraordinarily I don't know, for lack of a better way of saying it, extraordinarily tragic that had happened in the world, or particularly challenging. We've provided these resiliency pauses where we open it up to people to come. It's 1 hour, and Elaine and I facilitate a space where people can share what's on their minds. We can practice some of the skills within our model to help us regulate our nervous system's response to maybe what was happening or what prompted the pause. But we're finding that similar to what you said earlier, Elaine, when we have what's all that seems to be going on in the world right now, just has created this really a backdrop of challenges and distress. And so we have found just having a fairly regular biweekly, or we're going to be reducing it now to one time a month, check-in. Resiliency pause, where it's literally in the name. It's a pause to strengthen our use of the skills and really tap into our collective strengths so that we can have that pause from the challenges, the distress, the hardship that we're experiencing, regulate our nervous system, and then go back out so we can re-engage. That's a Yeah.
Well, and so I mean, we never know who's going to come. We've had
No.
people come from other countries. We've had people come from within our own country to talk about some of the challenges they're facing with all the administrative changes. But recently, Gloria Simoneau, who's an old friend of ours, and I met her, oh my goodness, when I think I was first starting the Trauma Resource Institute. I've traveled to Kenya with her. She's taken me into the Kibera slum, where she has a nonprofit called Harambee Arts, and she does amazing work. She's done amazing work in many places in the world, in Nepal, in Kenya, in Haiti. And so she was just distraught, really, I would say, at one of our meetings. And she said, Elaine, I just heard that all the funding for the medicine for AIDS is being taken away because of the cuts in USAID. Also, one of the programs that the United States funded was condoms. And that becomes a very important, of course, protection for AIDS in not only our own country but other countries around the world. And the thing about it is that Kenya has many riches of humans, and there's so many wonderful things about Kenya, but in terms of being economically challenged, they are. So she was distraught, and she's there right now. We're going to be meeting with her, I believe, next week, and we will be doing some of our CRIM workshops for, again, from our humanitarian arm, for people there in Kenya who are suffering right now because of the pulling of this funding. So that's another small thing that we're going to be doing. But I also want you to know that we have had a long association, like I said, with Harambee Arts. And part of that has been shared partnership of doing, like projects together. When I went to Kenya, um, um, Gloria had a Fulbright and she was working with an organization in Kenya. And so we did a workshop with our mental health model for the professional counselors of Kenya. And so this is how we survive as nonprofits or NGOs. We have partnerships. And so one of the fears I think that I have when I hear about what's happened is some of these partnerships will maybe go away because they're no longer going to be in existence because of the funding being pulled away. I mean, that's just the stark reality. Now,
Mhm.
some of you may be saying, well, why should we in America fund something in Kenya? Well, again, it's because of, again, the collaboration with our allies, collaboration that if there is something that's spreading in Kenya, then yes, we want to be concerned about, but it's also about the well-being, I think, also of I'm going to just talk a little bit about kids because we have two people that are community resiliency model teachers from one from Sierra Leone and one from Loma Linda University that have been working on the community resiliency model in a family-centered model that has been launched in the schools in Sierra Leone. And so now they've taken this model that has worked really well. There's good research showing the effectiveness not only for the children, but for the parents and the teachers and the administrators. They actually have gone to Kenya, spoken to the government of Kenya about doing a pilot there. So these are the types of things that improve the well-being of our planet. And there's already collaborations going in. So it's not like everyone's wanted a handout. I guess is what I'm saying is that we've been involved with collaborations. I know Loma Linda University has. They've been one of our wonderful partners we've had since the beginning. And that is continuing, but it's also continuing with a lot of suffering, I guess I'll say. Mike, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Well, it has been continuing amongst a lot of suffering. And I think um, I don't know how else to do this other than to pull out the lens a little bit for me to say, I I have a personal value system that the care of the other should be one of our focuses, ideally. And when as a country, I think I am a huge supporter of how do we help others. And of course, there are plenty of things to do here in the US to help others. And there's plenty of things for us to do to help others outside of our borders. And so I go back to, I think I may have, I don't know if I can't remember if I said this last week, but I know well before I came to try, the motto, the byline of try is compassion without borders. And I have long valued that. That was always a value of mine well before I came into Try. It continues to be a value of mine at Try. And I just think about that. I think that there's so much distress in many people's lives here in the US, outside of the US especially. And how can we, just as humans, fellow humans, be able to provide some support? And so to be able to have the opportunity, the realistic opportunity to provide the trainings that we do, the support that we do to people in those areas, I just find uh, I- I'm I'm uh, I'm grateful for the opportunity to do that because I consider it sacred work that we get to do, that we get to go in and provide this type of support, this type of help, and with through our partners like Loma Linda University and other projects that we have to provide support to our partnerships that then go in and provide that kind of level of support. It yeah, it's very meaningful to me.
Well, and I also want to bring in, in terms of our values, what drives us as human beings. We also have had a collaboration with Christian Aid. They're based in the United Kingdom, and we've been talking to Judy Pang. She's also a community resiliency model teacher. And I asked her, I said, well, how has the USAID affected you all? She goes, well, it's affected our funder. So they lost a large, a significant percentage. And so again, quite suddenly, but what I heard from her was how they were scrambling in terms of trying to still keep programs alive. And so that there's been that sort of I guess, action and advocacy. And I mean, and that's a good thing that we think about other ways for funding. And I think a lot of people who have seen the devastation that the abrupt ending of you, it looks like it is ending. I think that Marco Rubio announced on Friday that they would be completely dissolving USAID. Um, is that we have to think of other creative solutions for funding things within the United States as well as funding things outside of our country. And certainly there's a lot of community foundations, but there's not enough to deal with, I think, the element of suffering. So I just want to challenge all of us as Americans to think about, well, are you interested in helping in humanitarian aid in other countries, or do you think it all should be kept here? I'm not wedded to your answer to this, but I think as Americans, we need to think about that. I know I've spoken to many people that didn't really know what USAID was, and when they've learned about it, they go, well, gosh, I'm not in favor of the complete, canceling out of USAID. But it's like if you're not educated about something, how do you know how to be an advocate for it? But I really encourage people to learn about it, learn what they do, learn how things in other countries do really actually impact us here in the United States, and how do we want to be part of not only our families, our local community, and our world community as we go forward? Because I think what you said, Mike, about those kinds of values, about, and I know that you as a younger person, didn't your family take you someplace, if I recall?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I've been to many places internationally. I remember as a teen being able to visit areas of Mexico to help provide support and work in areas that didn't get a lot of attention, whether it be building buildings, whether it be providing services to kids in an orphanage. I've had the opportunity to do that in the U.S. in areas of the U.S. where that was very much poverty stricken and often marginalized. And to your point, Elaine, I was able to visit part of Samoa and when I was a young adult. So I've had opportunities to visit even well before I went to college to have the opportunity to visit that. Now, since working at Try, I've had the opportunity to visit so many more cultures, so many more different parts of the world, and I often come back um, with an expanded sense of what community means. And that's where I keep coming back to my desire and our desire to help others doesn't stop at the border. It continues well beyond because I have made personal connections with people in parts of the world, whether I've met them face to face or not. I mean, that's the other power of Zoom, to be honest. I have a love-hate relationship with it. There are moments where I just wish we could be in person together with certain people, but I'm so appreciative that I can see people face to face that are thousands of miles away from me. But that sense of global community gets smaller and smaller for me when I get to do and interact with folks from other communities because I see both. I see, not only do I get to hear about and share in the distress that they may be feeling, but I also get to sense and share in the things that help them get through that distress. And there are beautiful interchanges that we get to have that also strengthen our bonds and strengthen my commitment to helping them. Um, so it's yeah, I've had a long history of being able to exercise that muscle, if you will.
Well, I don't usually ask you this question, Mike, but I am going to ask you it today. I know that you have very strong values of your Christian faith.
Mhm.
And how, as a Christian, does that,
Hmm.
I mean, you kind of mentioned a little bit about it already without saying that you're a Christian, but I mean, I know that that's something that you value very dearly. You're a man of prayer.
Yeah.
Can you share maybe a little bit about that? Because I imagine there's people of many faiths
Mhm.
that might be interested in terms of your perspective about that.
I will boil it down to this for me. One of my having grown up in the Christian faith, I one of my favorite scriptures, one of my favorite, I guess, sacred verses for me that are sacred is uh, when Jesus was asked, "What's the most important commandment?" And he said, "Love your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." It wasn't an either or to me. So it was to me, it's linked. If my value system, if my faith asks me to love God, it's also my love of God is also intricately tied, inseparable to me with my love of neighbor, and it can't be separate. And if I'm not loving my neighbor, then I'm not loving God. And so to me, that's at the core of my value system. And so I work really hard at expressing my love uh, for God with my love for neighbor. And that love means I can't that they are valuable to me, regardless of where they're from, regardless of whether they hold my same belief system or not. That's irrelevant. My love for them is beyond that.
Well,
And that's, yeah, yeah,
I have to say, I've seen you live that in the work that you've done with Try, and just seeing how you are with your family, with your children, with me personally, that is your ethos. And so I thank you for that because I
thank you.
know that's the guiding principle. And it also guides, I think, you as the CEO of the Trauma Resource Institute about why all people are important. Now, today, as I was reflecting, I received a message on Facebook from a dear friend. Her name is Krista, and she sent me this. And it's actually the words of Pope Francis, and I think it fits in right here. And I'd kind of like to have this be, how we're ending today with this. And so I'm going to read it because I think I could not equal what he's saying here. But he says the human person is a subject with dignity who, through the constitutive relationship with all, especially with the poorest, can gradually mature in his identity and vocation. The true order amoris that must be promoted is that which we discover by meditating constantly on the parable of the Good Samaritan. That is, by meditating on the love that builds a fraternity upon open to all without exception. He warns us against deploying an ideological criterion that distorts social life, that imposes the will of the strongest at the criterion of truth. He went on to urge the bishops in the United States to continue working closely with migrants and refugees, proclaiming Jesus Christ and promoting fundamental human rights. God will richly reward all that you do for the protection and defense of those who are considered less valuable, less important, or less human, he added. He then turned his attention to the entire Catholic Church, urging its followers not to give in to the narratives that discriminate against and cause unnecessary suffering in our migrant and refugee brothers and sisters. He concluded by calling for all of us to work towards a society, I love this, that is more fraternal, inclusive, and respectful of the dignity of all. And certainly, I think those are the ethos of the Trauma Resource Institute, isn't it?
Percent.
Can you say what that is? Because maybe we haven't said that enough on here. What are our ethos?
Oh my goodness. Well, and Kevin always rattles us off so eloquently every time we do a training. But
You're talking about Kevin McLeod,
Kevin McLeod,
our director of community development. Yes.
but our values of social justice, service, and the value of every individual, family, and community. Um, that is at the core of our decision making. And so, well, in every decision we make, that's at the core of what we do.
Yeah. And I think that, both we just quoted some things from Christian faith, but we have many friends and colleagues from the Arab world, from the Hindu world, from the Buddhist world that are from the Muslim world that come to
Mhm.
us. That we're not political in our
No.
perspective about this, are we? It's
Mhm.
also the compassion without borders includes all, and
Mhm.
we've had projects in different parts of the world where people are fighting against each other, but we are in the business of healing.
Mhm.
We know that I think I have a belief, and I think you've heard me say this many times. If we were all in our zone of well-being as we're communicating with others, how would that maybe change the world and maybe mitigate the impacts of trauma? And as I say that, I also want to clearly admit that sometimes I go into my high zone. Oh my gosh, why did I say this? Could I said it in a better way? And maybe you have to apologize and say, oh my goodness, please forgive me. I wasn't my best self. And sometimes I go into my low zone and then I kind of disconnect and disengage. I mean, I know this is part of the human condition, but I think I strive as an imperfect being to be as much as possible in that zone of well-being and hopefully try to make amends when we've erred. And so we've kind of gone from the global to the community and now to the personal, because each one of us makes up individuals make up families, communities, and countries. So, Mike, I want to give you the final word of what you would like to say about what you would like our kind of international community to know as we're ending today.
My goodness.
A simple question, Mike.
It,
What's
just that. Uh, Let me share it this way, and I'll try to make this quick. My son and I were watching. This was years ago. He was studying a section on civil rights in America, and we were watching the movie 42 about Jackie Robinson and being the first African American player in baseball, Major Baseball league. And he turned to me because there was a scene where he was being mistreated pretty bad, as most of the movie he is, by people that look like me, white men. And he turned to me, he
treating a
goes,
black man, in case people don't know that Jackie Robinson
"Thank
was
you.
an amazing baseball player and man, and he
Yes.
was one of the first black. He was the first black, I think, admitted
Yep.
came into the National American Leagues. Yeah.
Yes." And he turned to me, my son said, "Sometimes, Dad, I don't like being a white person."
Mm.
And that just hit me, because I can understand why. Seeing an example, or repeated examples of white men treating Jackie so poorly, so awfully, denigratingly, right? And so in that moment, I was able to tell him, "Hey, I understand that. And our job then is to be a better example of that, to be a better example of what a white male can look like, that we don't have to treat people that way, that we can treat people with dignity, with respect and value. That's our job." And I see that, I guess I use that as an example for me of how do we, I see that as an example for me. How can I be a better example of the type of person that looks like me, because the type of person that looks like me has mistreated a lot of people over centuries. And then how can we, as someone that comes from the U.S., someone that comes from my faith, how can I be a better example of what that looks like in my love and care through action, my love and care of the people that may not look like me, because that is a huge value.
Well, I said I was going to give you the last word, but now you just sparked something in me. So, people who've listened to my show may know that my mom came to this country from El Salvador. And so when she came as a young woman, she came during World War II and she worked, they need people to come and work in the shipyard. So she came. She didn't last long in the shipyards. I don't think it was that wasn't her skill set, but she got a job because she didn't speak English, pouring coffee at the St. Francis Hotel. And in fact, I always say my name, Elaine, comes from the waitress that helped her learn English. But she didn't speak English when she came. She came for the promise of a new country. And my mom ended up marrying my father, who was a farmer from Montana. And they raised me and my brother and sister in the Bay Area near San Francisco. And my mom, I have to say, was the proudest American that you could imagine. I remember sitting on the couch with her as a little girl, and she would watch the conventions. And I'll say she was a big Democrat, but she couldn't vote because she only had her green card. And it wasn't until she was close to 70 and I said, Mom, why don't you get your citizenship? And I finally sat down with her and I found out that she was afraid of taking the test because she'd never been a good test taker. And the last thing she'd ever want to do was fail the test for the citizenship. So I was living in LA and I would fly up to San Francisco and literally went up and we went over the book for citizenship over and over and again. I tested her. So she was finally ready to take the test. She was very nervous. I flew up to San Francisco area And so I went with her when she took the test. She was very nervous and she went in. And when she came out, and she'd already lived here for like 50 years at that point. And she can't, and she really was worried that she may not get it. I said, Mom, you have been the most amazing American citizen. You have taught me more about loving America. It makes me kind of tear up a little bit than my dad did, who was born here, right? Who was an American through and through. And so she came out, and I can still see her face. It was a big smile on her face. And she says, I am an American citizen. And she goes, but they didn't ask me enough questions. I knew much more. They only asked me what the colors of the flag meant, but I could have told them everything. I said, I know you could have, Mom, you could have. So my sister and my sister-in-law, we all went out to lunch and we had a celebration for her citizenship. It was such a special day. But I guess I'm saying that because there's lots of immigrant bashing right now being done in the country. And I want to say, as the first generation of an amazing, spicy woman who came from El Salvador without speaking English, who raised three kids who have been very successful. I have to say that we have to really embrace our differences, and we have to give a space for, as the Pope said, all people, because we all deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. And we often end, right, in terms of what else is true, Mike. And so as we end today, I really encourage you all just to think of your life and what are some nourishing moments? What are some kindnesses that you may be able to do for each other in your community, for a friend, or maybe a kindness towards yourself? Maybe it's a walk. Maybe it's something where you can remember, that cultivating your well-being not only is important for you, but for the people who you are in communication with. So, with that, Mike, thank you so much, my friend, for being here with me today. And remember that you can donate to the Trauma Resource Institute and go to www.traumaresourceinstitute.com to learn more about the wonderful work that we do around the world. So, this is Elaine Miller-Karas signing off for Resiliency Within.